It just ripped off, a simple mistake with deadly consequences. Seconds after lifting off from London Heathrow, the unthinkable happens to a British Airways Airbus A319. Both engine covers, massive pieces of metal suddenly rip off, shredding the aircraft's skin and triggering a catastrophic fuel leak. As 80 people watch flames erupt from the right wing, the pilots realize their modern cockpit is lying to them. Their instruments say everything is normal, but their plane is bleeding to death in the sky. Where are you watching from? Comment below. This is the horrifying story of how a routine overnight check turned a safe jet into a flying bomb. The crisis of May 24, 2013 was born in the darkness of the previous night. During a weekly maintenance check, technicians opened the fan cowl doors on both engines to check oil levels. Lacking the specific tools needed to finish the job, they delayed the task, leaving the heavy doors unlatched. Here is where the expert trap was set. Violating standard procedure, the technicians placed no warning notice in the cockpit. When they returned later that night to finish the job, they made a fatal navigation error on the ground. They accidentally serviced a different Airbus A319 on a nearby stand. Believing they had finished Flight 762, they signed off the paperwork. The doors remained unlatched, held shut only by their own weight. The next morning, the error chain added its most critical link. The first officer performed the pre-flight walk-around. The fan cowl latches are located at the very bottom of the engine nacelle, making them notoriously difficult to see without crouching down or using a high-intensity flashlight. Because the doors appeared flush with the engine, the first officer, relying on expectancy bias, assumed they were secure. He returned to the cockpit and reported, "Everything looks good." As the A319 thundered down runway 27 left, the aerodynamic forces began to lift the unlatched doors. Passengers near the wings saw the metal flapping in the breeze. The moment the wheels left the ground, the airflow became too violent. The doors were ripped from their hinges. Debris slammed into the fuselage and severed the fuel metering unit's spill return pipe. The right engine was now spraying raw jet fuel into the slipstream. But that decision would have been enough to destroy most people. What happened next made everything before it look minor. Inside the cockpit, the pilots were present aware of a technical glitch but mechanically blind to the catastrophe outside. The first sign of trouble was the disengagement of the autothrust and a master caution for the yellow hydraulic system. The debris had sliced through the hydraulic lines, killing the power to the nose wheel steering and the right side brakes. If you are finding this breakdown of maintenance culture and human factor errors vital, hit the subscribe button now. We analyze the invisible triggers of aviation history every week. The senior cabin crew member tried to call the cockpit, but the captain, busy managing a heavy climb, disregarded the chime. This is a common failure in crew resource management CRM, prioritizing the machine over the human reports. When she finally got through 6 minutes later, she reported the missing cowlings but didn't mention the fuel leak because it wasn't visible from her specific window. The pilots were now flying a ghost emergency. They knew they had lost parts of the engine covers, but they believed the engines were still running fine. However, the first officer soon noticed a fuel imbalance alert. He calculated a leak rate of 100 kg every minute. He strongly suggested shutting down the right engine to save fuel. The captain, trapped by his own expertise, decided to keep it running to maintain thrust for the return to Heathrow. They were established on the final approach for runway 27 right, the only open runway left after their own debris had closed the first one. Suddenly, a massive bang shook the airframe. The leaking fuel had finally found an ignition source. The right engine was now an inferno. She thought she had won. She had no idea what Thomas was already putting in motion. The climax of Flight 762 was a race against fire. With the right engine dead and burning, the captain declared a full mayday. The aircraft was now relying on a single engine and compromised hydraulics. The autopilot disconnected, forcing the first officer to hand-fly the crippled jet through a thick haze of vibration and smoke. The captain made a chilling announcement to his co-pilot: "This landing has to succeed. There will be no second chance." Because of the hydraulic failure, they had no anti-skid protection on the right side. The jet touched down at 7:44 am. The captain used manual braking, but without the computer's help, the right main tyre burst under the friction. The plane skidded toward the edge of the runway, but the captain skillfully steered the nose so the wind would blow the engine flames away from the fuselage. The evacuation was a masterclass in speed. All 75 passengers slid down the left side chutes, while fire crews drowned the right engine in foam. Miraculously, there were 0 injuries. The investigation by the IAB was a scathing indictment of maintenance procedures. It revealed that the latch design was an ergonomic failure. The latches were too low, too dark, and lacked high visibility paint. It was a trap designed by engineers and triggered by tired technicians. But what Thomas did next, nobody saw coming. British Airways Flight 762 remains one of the most important case studies in human factors engineering, not because of what went wrong mechanically, but because of how human confidence quietly replaced verification. The aircraft was never supposed to fail. On paper, everything was correct. Maintenance logs were signed, inspections were marked complete, and every procedural checkbox had been ticked. Yet hidden within this system of trust was a small, almost invisible vulnerability, a poorly secured engine cowling latch. It was the kind of detail that rarely draws attention. Technicians had done their work. The paperwork confirmed it. The first officer reviewed the documentation. The captain trusted the first officer, and ground control trusted the maintenance crew. Each link in the chain appeared solid. But this is where the expert trap begins. The expert trap is not incompetence. It is the dangerous assumption that expertise equals infallibility. When people believe a system is safe simply because qualified people have signed off on it, verification stops, thinking stops, checking stops. In the case of Flight 762, no one physically confirmed the final latch alignment. The system relied on memory, habit, and assumption. Everything seemed correct until the aircraft met real-world stress. As the aircraft accelerated and climbed, aerodynamic forces increased. The loose engine cowling, held only by an improperly secured latch, began to shift. At first it was subtle, nothing that would alarm the cockpit immediately. But aviation rarely fails suddenly, it fails progressively. Then came the critical moment. Airflow pressure during climb caused the cowling to detach further. The imbalance created vibration, drag, and eventually an engine fire warning. What should have been a routine climb turned into an emergency sequence unfolding in seconds. Inside the cockpit, the crew responded with discipline. Training took over, checklists were followed, the engine was shut down, and the aircraft stabilized on a single engine. What mattered most was not just their skill, but their ability to avoid panic and execute procedure under pressure. The aircraft diverted and eventually landed safely. All 80 people on board survived, not because the system worked perfectly, but because the crew recovered from a system that had already failed on the ground. The investigation that followed changed everything. Airbus and Boeing both reviewed the design of engine cowlings. One of the most visible outcomes was the introduction of high visibility orange markings on critical latch points. These markings are designed so that if a latch is not properly secured, it becomes immediately obvious, even from a distance or in low light conditions. Ground procedures also evolved. Maintenance logs were no longer trusted in isolation. They were cross-referenced with digital photographic evidence showing physically secured components. Verification became visual, not just procedural. But the most important lesson was not mechanical, it was psychological. The expert trap had shown that trust without verification is not safety, it is vulnerability. Every person in the chain believed someone else had checked the critical detail, and that shared assumption nearly cost lives. Today, Flight 762 is studied not as a failure of engineering, but as a failure of human certainty. Because whether it is an aircraft, a medical system, the danger is always the same, trusting expertise without confirmation. If you do not verify the latches yourself, Eventually, something will come loose in the wind. There is a final, chilling piece of ground footage that shows exactly how many people walked past those unlatched doors before takeoff, proving that the oversight was visible to everyone but the expert.